IMHO Talk Show. One more again, IMHO Talk Show. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that. How does that sound, Miss Max?
Yeah, we do. We really do appreciate our listening audience. Wouldn't be here without you.
That's right. That's right. And when I say anywhere in the world, I kind of mean that thing literally as well, Miss Max. We are joined by our compadre, Jason Melendez. Jason, how you feeling today?
I feel great. It's hot, very hot in Virginia, but I feel generally great.
So the thing is, like we got.
You may have had to go take an aspirin after that last the primary there.
Right? No. Primaries come and go, and elections come and go, and you're never guaranteed a win for anything.
Mm-hmm.
My name wasn't on the ballot, so I wasn't.
Right.
Definitely not the way I would have wanted things to go necessarily, but I think things went fine ultimately.
So the fact that you say that, do you think you'd ever be interested in running for office?
I'll tell you what. In the past, I actually did something really interesting. I almost explored running for Board of Supervisors when I lived in Chesterfield County.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I did that was because there was an incumbent, a Democratic incumbent, who was, it's probably in his fourth or fifth term at that point on the Board of Supervisors. And he was not voting the way Democrats you think would vote on local government policy issues. I mean, he led the charge to get rid of public recycling in Chesterfield County. It's like just things like that. Super regressive budgeting. Overlooking the needs of the district. It was majority minority district in the county. So I think I could ultimately see a case where I would want to expand my public service into a more leadership-oriented role rather than a staff and professionalized-oriented role. But that being said, I am also very content where I am currently.
Yeah. Have you seen that as sort of a normal progression? Like, have you seen a lot of your colleagues kind of, like, once you're sort of involved, it seems like a normal progression?
A few, yeah, actually. I mean, there's a number of actually legislative staffers that have, went on to serve in elected office or previously served in elected office. Particularly at the local level is where we see a lot of it. But we also have a number of folks in the General Assembly right now who were former staff members. So, it seems to be that folks do give it a shot.
Yeah. So enough of the small talk, y'all. But where do we go from here, though? Because Jason, we asked how you were doing, and we have a job to do on this show. Like, no matter how hot it is, no matter how crazy things get in the world, and that's why we appreciate you coming in with us as well. To lend your expertise. But wow, sort of the outline that we have, for us and for the listener audience is, Trump is still at it. There's been a lot of, some would say, I don't know if we want to say advancements or there's been a lot done. Let's just say that. He's been busy. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, Max. He's been busy.
In the most evil and maniacal way possible.
Yes, whether it's foreign policy, domestic policy, including the big beautiful bill, as he calls it. That's one thing. When it comes to citizenship, the birthright citizenship is now in jeopardy, right? So all the talk around that, as y'all mentioned, we have our primaries that just happened locally, so we have the elections. And then maybe last but not least, to round out sort of the top four, is we had a resignation here in Charlottesville for the state of Virginia, for the state university, none other than President Ryan, by all accounts appearing to be forced out of office by the DOJ, by the federal government, for, I guess, not wanting to be racist and not being conservative enough. Because there was a recording, I don't know if y'all saw that, apparently there was leaked information about a meeting to where there was someone who actually said from the federal cabinet who said, y'all should try racism sometime. Why is everybody acting like that racism is so hard? Wow. Like that was a conversation apparently that was leaked. But out of those four, I don't know, Max, where do we start? I don't know. I'm
Jason? They're all big, meaty topics to contend with.
I mean, what's top of mind for you? Maybe,
I'll
President
say,
Ryan, maybe?
Yeah, the UVA thing, I think, is top of mind for everybody right now. I mean, the idea that the federal government has decided to begin micromanaging institutions of higher education is concerning. If DOJ's strategy as part of civil rights settlement and litigation is to try and force out, public college presidents, that's deeply concerning.
There's a board that had to endorse that, right?
So the Board of Visitors didn't exactly have any quite role in it.
Okay.
I mean, this was mostly because the DOJ was going after UVA because of the DEI programs.
Yeah.
This was something they were advocating for in their settlement. However, the board did have to accept his resignation, and the rector did do that. So it seems to be a done deal at this point. But I worry about what comes next. Like, who comes next?
And I was going to say, just a point of clarity to a little nuance to that too, is when we say DEI, of course, we know through this presidential administration, the term DEI has taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
To the Trump administration, it encompasses so much. Not just Trump, to the conservative, Republicans, at this moment in time, it encompasses so much. So you're talking about, and even based on President Ryan's letter, his resignation letter, he even touches on the fact that he had to make a hard choice, not wanting to step down, but not being selfish by also fighting it, right? Because his ultimatum was step down or not only departments, which includes jobs, right, but funding gets cut, right? And funding getting cut, also can include maybe certain scholarships and things like that may go to minority students or students of color.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was something that he did reluctantly, but it is definitely an attack on all things that is diverse, that is equitable, and that is inclusive.
Yeah,
right?
my worry, I think, broadly, is that those same programs are going to be attacked no matter what, whether he's there or not, because they did it at Harvard, they did it at Columbia, they're doing it everywhere else. So, unfortunate that he was put in this situation to resign. It's not an easy situation at all. But I still am not optimistic that even the resignation is going to change ultimately what the federal government decides to still go after, and what this new Board of Visitors decides to go after some of these new members. We already have Ken Cuccinelli, who's refusing to step down after the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee blocked his appointment. So, who knows what's happening? Maybe Ken will be the next president. Ultimately, I would not be shocked if the Board of Visitors did something like that.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot of members of the Board of Visitors that need to contend with themselves and think about what's better for the institution. These are political patronage roles, so I understand that they feel they're beholden to Governor Youngkin in Richmond, but I think they need to really think deep down within.
Have they been vocal at all with the Board of Visitors?
Not that I've heard. No. They've been pretty quiet on all things this year, really. Especially since the turnover with some of the new Republican appointed members that had come in. So we don't quite know what comes next and what they're thinking in their mind. But, ultimately, if we're thinking about the goal of every decision at UVA should be, twofold. One, to improve the education of students, or threefold. I'll say one, to improve the education of students. Two, to provide quality health care. And three, to have strong community relations. And none of this resignation does anything to further any of those three goals.
Yeah. And that name that I heard you mention about possibly being appointed, did you say Kent?
Ken Cuccinelli.
Ken.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you said Kent as in Dr. Kent that also stepped down from the medical center last year.
No.
I was like, whoa, this is breaking news. This is breaking news.
No. Ken Cuccinelli,
Yeah, Ken, yeah.
Which we hope not. We don't want that either.
Right,
That's worse.
That.
That's not good. So.
Yeah, and it was, I guess it's sort of like a shot in the dark, metaphor, so to speak, right, Max? Because if somebody gives you an ultimatum of saying you need to step down. I was trying to think of a good contrast, but I'm just gonna say it plainly. If you don't step down, we're gonna take all these benefits away, right? But you still knowing that stepping down, they still don't like what's in place, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. But you're gonna do, if you're a good-hearted person, which he definitely appears to be, at least by these actions that he's taking. Right, it's like you at least gonna do all that you can do, to try to save, as he said in his letter, putting the staff first and not being selfish. Because again, this is the biggest employer, in our area, right? Yeah. And so there's a lot that affects the community by these decisions. But but the Board of Visitors needs to grow some legs, grow a spine, grow a backbone, and remember what public education is about, what higher learning is about, what the university experience is supposed to be about. Whether we're talking about research and things like that that's supposed to help make the world a better place, and it not being based on any particular person's individual set of values, right? It's supposed to be about the greater good, right? Especially when you are the state university.
I think it's also going to cause ultimately a reckoning for the state, and at least in Democrats in the Virginia General Assembly, to think about the oversight process for public institutions of higher education, because right now it's very executive heavy. They're taking a lot of top-down instruction from Governor Youngkin in Richmond, and I think this is kind of because we haven't had this issue in the past, but it's kind of exposed that perhaps we need to really think about how we govern our universities, how we can get more participatory processes in that, getting staff members on the board of visitors, getting voting student members on the board of visitors. They've got an advisory student member. But they don't have a faculty member, so there might have to be some adjustments there too.
Mm-hmm. And what's next, possibly? Because I know you're involved with a lot of our state, representatives. Like, are there next steps that's being made public? At least from the front of, of potential things that can be done to try to uphold, like the integrity and the values that like that we would like to keep at our university in the face of all this.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's at least one iron in the fire currently. I'll also say, folks have rumored that George Mason might be next, because George Mason has long had a very strong diversity program. But I'll say, when it came to Ken Cuccinelli's appointment, which the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee rejected, usually it's precedent that if the committee rejects it without the full Senate rejecting, the person will just step back, because ultimately they're not going to be approved. Ken is arguing, and the governor's arguing, that he should stay on until the full Senate has a chance to convene and vote, which probably won't be until September or maybe January. Mm-hmm. So Ken is trying to cling on to this role on the Board of Visitors as long as he can, even though the committee has decided they do not want him on the Board of Visitors. So a number of senators, I think, I potentially, I don't know if Senator Deeds, our senator, was named in the suit, but I know Louise Lucas is leading the suit, Senator Lucas is leading the suit. And a number of Democratic senators are saying, to some of these university boards that, if you have somebody who was rejected by the committee, they need to step back.
Mm. So who's providing oversight? I know we got more topics to go to, but this is very important. So is there oversight for boards of visitors at the university, or does their vote sort of have the final say? And of course, because again, some people say that if the UVA Board of Visitors would have stepped up or maybe challenged, right, the DOJ, that the outcome may have been different. So
the oversight.
Yeah. So I'm curious, is there oversight?
Generally, I mean, the governor is the oversight. The Secretary of Education is part of that oversight. The General Assembly has an oversight role on all things executive branch related, but by nature, our General Assembly being a part-time legislature, they're just not meeting frequently enough to be able to actually provide that kind of valuable oversight. But it's long been, I think, public institutions of higher education in Virginia have just been very executive heavy in terms of their control. We're definitely seeing that with Glenn Youngkin. He's made a concerted effort to kind of put people that he wants on these boards of visitors, not just qualified people. He wants to put people he wants on there.
Yeah, and my understanding, Max, is that it's about the federal funding ultimately, right? It's so your university could have a board that's saying, no, we stand by our president, we stand by our liberal arts, or whatever the case is, but then the federal government could be like, okay, well, if you do, then we're pulling X amount of funding.
Yeah,
right.
Do you have any sense of how much we get that the University of Virginia gets from the federal government?
I probably could narrow you down to $1, but I mean, it's a lot. I mean, in terms of research, UVA Health does a tremendous amount of research across all health fields. Mm-hmm. We get federal funding for transit support, I believe, in Charlottesville as well, for the university transit system. Of course, you get students that are on different forms of grants and Pell Grants and whatnot. I mean, there's just a number of money, and a ton of money that comes from the federal government down to the UVA. Yeah. So it would be a huge deal for us.
See, the thing is that I'm listening to you guys talk about what the Board of Visitors stepping up, and I hear you talking about what the current DEI equity programming that the university has, and crossing our fingers, I guess, at this point that they don't repeal any of that. But we are talking about the University of Virginia, and part of me wonders whether or not these changes are changes that somebody's just waiting for time and opportunity in order to put in place.
I think absolutely. If you saw the Jefferson Councils,
take the University of Virginia. Let me put it differently.
No, you're right.
The University of Virginia great again.
Yeah, I mean, you saw the Jefferson Council's letter last month, where they were actually calling for Jim Ryan to resign last month, and there's no doubt about it, in my mind at least, that a number of people that are involved in that Jefferson Council Alumni Association, probably have some pretty close ties to the Trump administration. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. These are pretty high net worth individuals, pretty well connected into alumni from UVA. And they were calling for Jim Ryan to resign last month just over DEI. So I bet they are probably elated and thrilled. But the students are not, faculty isn't, and it's gonna leave a big stain on the university. But I think all I know is the Board of Visitors ought to pick wisely, because there's probably going to be a number of protests at Carr's Hill for months, months on end.
No, it's just don't worry about that.
Well, that's true until they get fed up.
Yeah, we are talking to Jason Melendez, political strategist, amongst so many titles. So talking about the resignation that hit home this week of President Jim Ryan being forced out by the DOJ. So I guess, guys, so sort of like working up from the university into the city and up, because one thing that's another conversation that I know that is heavy around here as well is citizenship, right? And like how to handle immigration and things of that sort. So if I'm not mistaken, Jason, right, this new big beautiful bill that Trump calls it, like it's a part of his domestic policy bill, and I think some of the birthright changes are a part of that bill, right? Or is it separate from that bill?
I'm not entirely sure. I know the bill is being read out in full on the Senate. I don't know if you all saw that, but the Senate Democrats led a push to make sure that the 900-page bill be read out in full. So that's been going on all night, and actually probably last time I checked, they were on page 700. So they still got a little bit of ways to go. I wouldn't be shocked that there are a number of immigration-related changes in the legislation. The Supreme Court case as well kind of just opened up a floodgate for the administration to go after what it's been long wanting to go after. Other big concurrent issue with the litigation, the Supreme Court's decision, is its impact on injunctions. I think ultimately, we had this idea, this precedent before, that if a district court made a decision, you'd have an injunction, potential nationwide injunction, so that we wouldn't see these kinds of issues pop up elsewhere until it had been litigated. And that applies to a whole host of issues, whether it's abortion or whether it was the Affordable Care Act or anything. And they've kind of knocked down that wall, and it's very possible that we might have a broken judiciary, one other step into a broken judicial branch as a result of that. But the birthright citizenship order, I know a number of folks that just hit close to home personally for. We have a number of great organizations doing fantastic work here in Charlottesville that I know that hit home personally for. So I'm a little bit worried about what comes next in that trajectory.
Yeah, because our folks in the Latino community, right, have already been talking and concerned about just the everyday safety, right, of being profiled, having safe spaces, right, and we're talking about like good citizens, regardless of the pictures that gets painted, by some. We're talking about people here making an honest living, but kids are worried about going in public because they're not sure if ICE is going to show up, and things of that sort. So they're already facing that, but now, if this birthright legislation gets fully passed, then we're talking about it being like by law, like you no longer, can be here unless you were born here, and that means birthright means that your parent can't come here and have you here and say you're a citizen. If your parent is illegal, automatically makes you illegal. Like, that is a huge deal.
Big issue with equal access, equal protection under law. That when you kind of think about it, I mean, this is not offering equal protection under law. This is creating a bifurcated system where some folks are separate than others in terms of their right to be here and lawfully be present. I also say, kind of in building on the concerns that we've been seeing with ICE in different communities. Of course, we saw the raid that happened at our courthouse in April, but much more recently in Chesterfield, at the Chesterfield County Courthouse, I think it was upwards of 14 folks had been picked up by ICE in their courthouse. And these were mostly folks who were, at the General District Court, they had received their judgment, went to go pay their fines, and then right after they paid their fines, they were getting picked up by ICE. These are, most of the offenses were like, maybe didn't have an updated registration or, got a fine for a safety hazard on their vehicle. These weren't folks who were showing up to General District Court because they had murdered somebody or because they had done something, to harm somebody. These are folks who, were there for very minor offenses and then were in turn being picked up by ICE. And that's deeply concerning because it just shows this pattern of them willing to use courthouses as their kind of front to do operations. Courthouses they don't have entitlement to, honestly.
Yeah.
And so, with this thing that we're discussing here, how will that impact our economy? If we're deporting, and deporting anyone, especially those who fall within the whole birthright thing that you just described there, as well as those who are here illegally, and presumably a lot of those people are work here in the United States. How does that impact our economy?
I mean, it's going to have a tremendous impact. I mean, in every state. I mean, a number of folks who've come here make up a bulk of our blue-collar workers, our agriculture-related workers, of course, important for Virginia. And I think states like Virginia, states like Florida, who are kind of looking at this and saying, this is actually ultimately bad for some of the businesses and some of the economic opportunities that these states have, and I think ultimately there is going to have to be some pushback from business owners. Ultimately, that being said, a good question. I guess time will tell. That being said, there's a lot of room to go around for improving those work conditions too. This is not just a kind of a one-sided thing. There's on the business side, a lot of these some of these blue-collar labor industries where there aren't strong union protections. There is a lot of work to be done to make sure that labor is dignified, justified, and well paid. But all in all, the economy is going to hurt from mass deportations.
So let me ask you something else, and this is going to be a taboo question, but I'm asking it for the sake of asking it. What are the positive things that could potentially come out of this? How will it change America?
I mean, I don't know if I can really draw down one positive aspect.
Okay.
If I'm Elon Musk or Stephen Miller, for example, perhaps my answer would be that we're moving closer to a pure white society. But otherwise, that would be the Stephen Miller answer. But I don't think there's any rational positive thing to come out of this necessarily.
Aside from that, we know race is a factor, but I'm talking economy. I'm talking healthcare. Resources, things like that.
I mean, even resources-wide, housing-wide, I know there's a lot of folks on the right that will say, immigrants that come here are taking up, too many resources or housing is too expensive. Housing is too expensive because we haven't built any housing. Okay. I mean, that's ultimately our fault. We didn't build enough housing for ourselves. And we've got a lot of work to do to reverse that. But, when it comes to things like healthcare and resources, it's a humanitarian issue. I mean, ultimately, these folks have come from countries like El Salvador or countries in Central and South America that are unsafe places or do not have quality access to health care. We're actually giving that money away in aid. We're giving that money to those countries in aid. So the difference of them, being here and receiving those services and being able to build prosperity for themselves and their families, versus letting them languish in a country that they may not feel safe in, that we are providing a tremendous amount of aid to. I don't know if it's much of a difference at all.
Just a question.
Yeah.
And there's a book. I forget the exact title, but it's something to the effect of the economy of colonialism, right? The title something like that, right? And so essentially, what it gets down to is that immigration wouldn't be as much of a problem, right, if there wasn't for colonialism, right? Because essentially it's talking about how resources were taken from other countries.
Yeah.
Right?
When we go to places and plunder places, well, what other option do you have other than to go and search
where
for
the
something?
resources.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the same thing like we said last time on the show when we were talking about the unhoused population, the downtown mall. If you become, unhoused in places like Louisa or in Fluvanna, you're coming to Charlottesville because that's the one place you can find all the resources you need.
Yeah, spot on. And Maxie, and it just goes to show, with a lot of things that go on and we know how people in power positions try to use others against each other like a chess match, right? So one of the things that Trump said in one of his recent speeches was that the birthright clause was meant for slave babies, literally, like verbatim what he said. And so, like, to me, that, like, I have two feelings about that, because on one side it's kind of like, I think that's him kind of trying to pander to black people, to be like, black people, y'all don't worry, y'all be cool with what we doing, you know, like to the Latino population, right? I feel like that's what he's trying to do on one side, but on the other side, it makes me think there are some people who really believe that white people are indigenous to this land.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because for you to say that birthright is only something that is even referring to people of color, right? So you're talking about, you know, Africans that were brought here, or people of African descent that were brought here, or you're talking about, you know, brown immigrants that come into the country now, right? To keep phrasing immigration as if it's only black and brown people that immigrate here, like, shows a mental illness that a lot of people have. I can't even just say conservatives. A lot of people have right now, because to say a statement like that again means that there's people that believe that this is a white land, that white people somehow are indigenous to here and didn't immigrate here as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that their reality, their personal reality, is their truth, and so yes, they convince themselves of that, and you know, no one's telling them any differently.
Yeah. But you know, that being said, also here locally,
since I brought up Charlottesville,
the primaries. So, like, what's the big takeaways from the primaries we just had earlier this month?
Yeah, you know, I'd say a few big takeaways. Ranked choice voting worked tremendously well. You know, when Arlington first went to go use it, which Arlington was the first locality in Virginia to use it a few years ago, they had a few little stumbles in terms of getting everything smooth, but you know, we did not have those same issues. We actually had a really seamless process. You know, so shout out to our registrar for making that you know, easy and well communicated to voters.
So before you go on to, like, can I add a caveat there, or can I get you to elaborate on ranked choice voting? Because I've actually heard, Max, I've heard some people question the ranked choice voting based on how the city's election for mayor turned out. Right, and again, like, it's some, you know, RCV is new, and you know, like, there's still a lot to be understood, you know, about it, like, because it still doesn't make sense to some people. Actually, you know, doing popular vote versus ranking votes. So some people are you know, kind of wondering, like, how did the candidate, you know, Jen Fleischer, that received the majority of the votes by percentage, right? And then I believe Juan Diego was in like the 30-some range, and then Brian Pinkston was in like the teens, right? Like, some folks, and it could be conspiracy, but some folks are just like did ranked choice voting somehow sway it and work in Jen's favor somehow? And I think that's more because people just didn't expect for it to turn out, for the election result to turn out that way. But on the other side, there are some people that are questioning it because of how that turned out.
Yeah, I mean, I have a tremendous confidence in the results. You know, I mean, Taylor has done a fantastic job in implementing ranked choice voting. You know, again, there's, you know, a few learning lessons for Charlottesville, because, you know, there are ways we can make this process, you know, better over time. You know, one thing in my mind, I think we could probably do away with Democratic primaries in Charlottesville. You know, most cities in Virginia don't hold primaries for city council. So that's something we could do. It would save us money, and, you know, to be quite honest, I don't know, we haven't elected a Republican in years, so we don't really need a Democratic primary, because we're not pitting two parties against each other. We've only elected Democrats in the city for the past several years. So I think we could probably do away with the Democratic primaries in Charlottesville and simply just move to the general election cycle. The other thing I think Charlottesville would benefit from is districts or wards. Charlottesville's been able to evade.
Is it big enough? You think it's big enough?
It is. Well, I mean, any locality is technically big enough. You know, we've been able to evade the conversation because, you know, you can make the claim that under the Voting Rights Act, you know, our voting power, you know, black voting power isn't diluted. So that's how Charlottesville's been able to evade it. But most other cities in Virginia that have had to go through charter rewrites have had to implement districts now. Virginia Beach, Norfolk. You know, simply because there was actually a real legitimate claim that, you know, there was voting power being diluted.
So, and us being a Dillon Rule state wouldn't impact that? And then do you think that we may need more counselors if we were to have
representation?
Districts?
You know, it may be worth it. You know, I mean, perhaps even, you know, you could do 6 councilors and 1 at-large mayor, who's not a strong mayor, but just an at-large mayor, which is what City of Fairfax does.
That's
So
interesting.
you got a whole bunch of options that you can implement or play, or you can keep the number as it is. I mean, and just have the districts is all.
What's the benefit?
I think it's better representation, more localized representation. One of the things that we learned out of the results from ranked choice voting was how well Jen did in the Summit precinct, which is her home precinct, I believe, and we haven't elected a counselor from that side of town from a while. And one of the things, if you look at our current council, a lot of the members actually live not too far from each other. So I do think that if we had wards, say in lower income parts of town, we might be able to actually elect strong representation for those folks.
Oh, I don't know if we want that. Oh.
I think it's a win. I think it's a win.
It might be a win. I don't know if we want it.
Yeah. So are we saying like having a council that's made up of people from the different districts?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Different neighborhoods. I don't know. I mean, if it's equal though, right, Max? Like if you,
the districts are all. When you draw the districts, it'd be kind of just like how we draw the precincts. You have to take into account certain factors. Ultimately, it should produce fair representation.
Yeah.
Is ultimately the goal. I mean, the at-large system.
That part.
The at-large system is, kind of, I think, one of the things that folks are getting a little tired of, honestly. And I think we might see it with this school board race as well, this whole at-large school board race where you've got all these, so many candidates running. I think folks are maybe going to be interested in the idea that perhaps we move towards, but that would have to be something that is implemented under state law.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that could because I mean the makeup of Charlottesville though, Max, right? Like the because right now again the at large piece, like he said, you have the people that have the money and the resource, right, to be able to pay more attention and come to all the meetings or like send the letters or like just to like sort of throw their weight, right? And they may be from the smaller neighborhood, but think about if 10th and Page, West Haven, like let's think about like if all these different areas had specific and consistent representation, like that could be a benefit to the greater community.
Yeah, well, also,
do you think that if individuals were interested in their ward community being represented on council, that we would already see them running for council?
I think there's such a barrier to running to office these days. There's a few different barriers. One is a skill barrier. I mean, combined between all 3 candidates that ran this year, at least $80,000 to $90,000 was raised between all 3 campaigns. So that's a hurdle in itself. But then there's also kind of the compensation piece, which the city council has voted to raise its salaries because the compensation was so low, and you spend so much time away from your regular job to do some of these senior city council duties. So that was a barrier for folks as well. But I think a perfect example as to why I think wards would work perfectly is because we already have the precincts that are pretty much roughly divided evenly, but the amount of voters who actually show up from the precinct that votes at Charlottesville High School and that side of town is way more than the amount of folks who show up on the other side of town, the direct opposite side of town, showing up in elections. So arguably right now, folks in that northeast portion of the city are extremely well represented because they're all showing up. But if you're thinking about it, we want to activate a broader swath of our residents, and I think a district forum could do that.
Speaking of voters, were you surprised at all about how many voters participated in the primaries for council?
I was, yeah, but yes and no.
So put that into perspective. Our population of 50,000.
Yeah.
How many people voted?
I want to say it was probably 2,000 or something.
I think it was like approximately 6.
6, okay. I might have been looking at per person votes. One of the things, I think the biggest takeaway is that more people voted in the city council primary than they did in the statewide primaries, which I've never seen that before. Where you have more residents show up for a down ballot race in a primary than the top ticket races. So that was interesting. Definitely really unique to see some of the breakdowns by precinct. But folks were engaged. This was on the back of our ballot, so it wasn't on the front of our ballot. So it was interesting that people were still flipping their ballot over, making sure that they were, looking at the ranked choice voting ballot and voting however they wanted to vote. So that was a positive thing ultimately. So hopefully, we continue to see folks involved in city elections.
Yeah, and now what about from the state standpoint? What's some of the key takeaways, maybe outside of Charlottesville, from the primaries?
Yeah, I'll say I couldn't have not been happier from the statewide primaries this year. The Attorney General's race was kind of hotly watched towards the end because Shannon Taylor, who is the current Commonwealth's attorney in Henrico, had taken a significant sum of money from Dominion Energy and political contributions, upwards of $800,000 by the time we were coming around to the primary. So Clean Virginia, of course, an organization local to Charlottesville, spent a lot of time advocating and investing in Jay Jones's campaign and making sure that we could have a black nominee for Attorney General this year who's actually poised to do really well. Lieutenant Governor's race, and there was a lot of folks here who kind of split on Senator Hashmi and Senator Rouse. I've known Senator Hashmi for years. I've always, viewed that in this field she was, the most qualified candidate. It was a very close race at the end of the day. But Senator Hashmi, I think, is going to make a fantastic lieutenant governor.
I think a lot of people were surprised by that too.
I think folks
I think
were too.
The public opinion was sort of Stoney definitely, maybe Rouse, but Hashmi kind of was a dark horse.
But what I'll say, I think is there were a lot of political pundits who were saying, oh, there was no way Ghazal Hashmi would do well in the western half of Virginia,
right,
up and down the I-81 corridor because she's a Muslim woman who was born in India and still has an accent.
Right.
But it turns out that was actually her bread and butter. That was where she did the best. She did really well up and down 81 in a way I didn't quite expect myself, honestly. But
what was the strategy? Do we know?
She spent a lot of time there. I think that was the win.
Okay.
She spent time there, and she spent money running ads there.
Okay.
There were a lot of candidates who didn't spend a requisite amount of time down there. For example, I'll say like Senator Rouse, fantastic candidate, fantastic guy. I think he thought he had Blacksburg and Montgomery County in the bag because he played Tech football. But that was a city that voted for Hashmi, or a town that voted for Hashmi, and I think Hashmi just made a concerted effort to spend her time down there, and it paid off. It really did.
Yeah. Big talk. We are talking to Jason Melendez, political strategist. Always good conversation. And so I think what we had last on the agenda, besides what else you all have in mind, is talking about the foreign policy. Like anything that you can share in that regard of where we are right now when it comes to our country's involvement, and when it comes to folks thinking about like our young men and women that protect the country, right, and sort of really what's at stake, right? Because there's a lot of of course there's always been a lot of opinions on the sides of like our foreign policy when it comes to what we should be involved in and why we shouldn't be involved there. Even things we've talked about, Max, on this show, particularly like when it comes to the sort of the theology or like the religious philosophy of how this country to this day takes the modern country of Israel and makes it biblical, right? Yeah. And say that that's why we make certain foreign policy decisions that we do. Some people say that that's like way off base, and that like that is a misconstrued belief, right? And then, of course, we have Muslim immigrants and stuff here as well. And so then they also, as we've seen, for a while, especially since like 9/11 time, like they get, like they get outcast and they get profiled more heavily as well. Like when these kind of dust ups happen between, Iran, or whether it's Iraq or, and other places out there in that area. But and even I saw something recently, Jason, as well too, where they were saying that there was some communication apparently. And you don't know what to believe on the internet anymore, by the way. I will add that disclaimer. But apparently there was one who even said that there were some Israeli officials that were even planning some sort of attack on the U.S. and then blaming Iran for it, because the public opinion right now is people are kind of expecting Iran to do something, right? It's like so you have like just this whole like just like hodgepodge of stuff that's going on. So I'm just curious on, from your perspective with all that's going on, like what you could help us put in perspective.
Gosh, I mean, it's a mess. I mean, I kind of share that concern that you started out with, because I come from a family of service members as well. So it is a mess. I think the attack on Iran that the United States led, was a little short-sighted. And in fact, I think we might learn that very soon, that perhaps it didn't even quite accomplish what we thought it was going to accomplish. It may have just delayed them by a few months, and we'll be back at this junction in a few years. Ultimately, what I think folks ought to remember is that we had a nuclear deal in place, negotiated by President Obama. It wasn't 100% perfect, but not a lot of things are 100% perfect. But it gave us accountability. We were able to check in and see where the Iranian government was enriching uranium. We were able to ensure that they weren't using it for defense capabilities and that they were only using it for civilian uses. And there was incentives tied for their compliance, and it was working. But Donald Trump pulled us out of that deal, and ultimately the deal collapsed. And that's ultimately why we're here now. We had foreign policy in place that was designed to curb this threat over the long run, because, in this mindset, Iran is determined to have a nuclear weapon. They want to be a nuclear power. So destroying their uranium stock, it's only going to set them back a few months. They're going to continue on that goal. We need to remove the incentive for them to want to be a nuclear power. We need to remove the incentive for a lot of countries to want to be a nuclear power, because ultimately these are weapons we really don't need in the first place. I think it is. It's ultimately disappointing that we were willing to accede to the demands of the Prime Minister of Israel and kind of insert ourselves in this conflict in a way that was not necessary, and it ultimately put our service members at risk, because Iran's retaliation is always going to be our bases in the Middle East. So,
and Trump's response was just mind blowing to me. It's mind blowing to a certain extent, right? Like I guess I gotta qualify that because I'm not surprised, because that is how bigots act, right? It's like he's surprised that they're not listening to him. You follow back? He's literally cursed on TV.
Oh yeah,
because the ceasefire ended, and it's almost like he really thought that something that's been going on for centuries, because he told them to stop, they were going to stop.
He's spending too much time on his phone and on Twitter and on Truth Social instead of being in rooms and communicating with heads of government and heads of state to make this work. What's really interesting to me is our director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is really a staunch, pacifist, if you want to put it in any sort of way. She actually, the rumor had been that she was in fact cut out of these dialogues about whether the United States would lead this kind of tactical operation in Iran. And so that's interesting to see that there are members of cabinet amongst themselves sparring over what direction to take. And ultimately, some of the most important voices are being literally cut out just on the basis of ideology.
Because I believe reps from the National Intelligence, I think it was, they were actually disagreeing on the statements that the White House press secretary made
so there was
about
that.
The impact of the attack.
The White House was disagreeing with what DIA was saying, and then ultimately, in all of that, the White House, it's customary that they'll notify. There's 8 members of Congress that form the Gang of 8, and then members from the majority and the minority in both the House and Senate, and the leaders of the intelligence committees in both chambers. And usually the White House will inform them of operations before they happen. And as far as we understand currently, the White House didn't tell the Democratic members of the Gang of 8, which makes up half the Gang of 8, about what was what they were planning. So a lot of war powers questions. We're actually seeing Republicans, ironically, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, some of the most conservative folks, saying, why are we going down this route? President Trump spent all of his time campaigning saying that Joe Biden was getting us into wars and that he wasn't going to start any wars, and now we're at 6 months in, and he leads flies 3 B-2 bombers into Iran unprovoked. So I'm curious to see how this all shakes out. It seems that things are starting to calm down a little bit, and the ceasefire hopefully will hold. But there needs to be diplomacy for a long-term solution.
Yeah. And you said something key that that was so pertinent. I don't want to overlook. When you talked about the incentive, like getting rid of the incentive for an Iran wanting to have nuclear weapons. And to me, that incentive is check it out, Max, how you treat people, right? It's like maybe if we stop trying to rule the world with an iron fist, you don't have to live in fear. It's almost like being a drug dealer, right?
Is it?
It's almost like running the streets. Now, because you hear people that run the streets all the time, like as soon as they get out the game, they say, I'm tired of like having to watch my back, right? Like I'm tired of having to look over my shoulder and worry about this and that. It's the same kind of thing. It's like as long as we about that life, then you're gonna live with the threat of retaliation.
Right. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I hear what both of you are saying, but I don't know that there's any amount of incentive because that would make people are power driven and power hungry, and countries and especially those that we're talking about right now. And so I don't think that there's any amount of incentive that would make them not want to be that. It's not about the dollar, in my opinion. It's about being. It's about power.
I think that very well plays a role in it. I still think it's worth a shot. I mean, because now is probably the better time to strike, while the iron is hot. These last few years, Iran has spent a lot of their time building up their power in the region through terrorist proxies, like Hamas and Hezbollah and a number of terrorist organizations throughout the region. As many of those organizations have started to cripple and to fall, what ultimately led to this showdown is now the fact that there really is no buffer between Iran and Israel. I mean, the catfight is now literally between them. So if there's any time to perhaps inject the idea of an incentive, perhaps it's now when both Iran and Israel are vulnerable to a potentially massive conflict.
It's the Jason Melendez with the good word as always. What are we missing, Jason? I mean, that was a jam-packed hour right there, and I'm actually proud of us for getting through that. That was
the one thing I'm going to throw out that we didn't cover is the New York City primary elections, which I think was ultimately a more interesting primary election than the Charlottesville primary election. I grew up in New Jersey, so I was always used to seeing Andrew Cuomo on TV and his brother, when he was on Chris Cuomo when he was on CNN and whatnot. But Zohran Mamdani was a fantastic candidate. He's going to really shake things up. And one thing I want to see is Democrats in our party. He may be further to the left than most average Democrats in our party, but he captivated folks, and folks showed up and voted because he talked about issues people care about. And as far as it seems, Fox News has stopped talking about his policy platform because Fox News, people that watch Fox News probably are starting to like it too. I mean, giving resources to newborn, families with newborns, raising the minimum wage, things that Republicans are starting to tag in on now. I mean, so he is the kind of candidate I think that will, inspire some enthusiasm. We'll hopefully see more younger folks running for office, especially at the local level where the impact is so undervalued sometimes. And there's a lot that to be done right now. So that's one election I think really interesting. Look how he played his cards there, because he went from being very far behind Cuomo in the polls to washing Cuomo away. And I know Cuomo's seething, but Zohran Mamdani has done
he took it for granted.
He did, but Zohran ran a fantastic campaign. And I think he'll make an excellent mayor. It's really unfortunate to see how Republicans are coming out to say the most Islamophobic things about him.
Crazy
already. Not shocked, but already. But that was an interesting election. That was an election I think that is a turning point within Democratic politics. Folks always watch the New York City primary election, at least on the Democratic side, because it usually gives us a good barometer, like what can we expect on the national stage. And this is, to me, I view it as a turning point. And I hope more candidates will pick some cues from him.
Yeah. And it almost shows a good and bad. Well, it does of sort of modern day political like campaigns, right? Because the New York mayor-elect, I guess, is also like sort of celebrity status. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, you just go on Instagram, you saw photos of him everywhere.
Yeah. Like he's done music videos and stuff like that. So, So we're kind of in a time now to where like your celebrity status can help you, right? Like it's sort of like your popularity. But the thing is politics. Voting has always been sort of a popularity contest to some certain extent. But as long as we're choosing people because they're qualified and not because. And
he's a 2-term assemblyman, so I think he's ready to step into the job. I think what he did so well in terms of leaning in with that kind of popularity status kind of concept. Because he didn't have that before. Most people probably wouldn't, have known outside of New York City. Maybe would have known who Zohran Mamdani was until, maybe April. But he really leaned into meeting folks where they're at. Unconventional media, really listening to folks, and I think it's made a huge difference. Just hearing the things that people want to hear and actually having a plan to deliver on it. Because he wasn't just saying stuff, but he actually had thoroughly written out policy platform on his website, PDFs with information, how he plans to achieve some of these things. So he is a model for candidates. If anyone's looking to run for office, they ought to look towards him and take some cues.
Yeah, and our listener Amanda.
And I saw Deja Fox, also a good example. I was seeing her. I saw one of her Instagram posts the other day. Another great young Democrat running for office. So young Democrats are doing some things, guys.
Hey, look at them. As long as we get something right.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Let's do something right. Like I don't, like dare I say, regardless of political party, like we got to get back to some common sense stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like
government should be somewhat boring.
Care about the common good, right? That's
what
we should be doing. And then the way that we that we look at things fiscally, right, as far as a budget, we can debate that, and there's different aspects of governing that we can debate, but when it comes to respect for the office, respect for all citizens, right, and looking out for our constituents, that should never be questioned.
Yeah, I mean,
and
ultimately,
right now,
I want to wake up to headlines of good headlines rather than waking up to headlines that we might potentially be in a war with Iran. I want to get back to the days where some things can be just a little bit boring and casual.
Yeah.
Be nice.
Good stuff.